Hello, John Bloodworth Gentleman Crafter here again with another experiment in embroidery. This time around I'm going to be designing this journal cover in Hatch Embroidery Digitizing software. So this design is quite simplistic and would suit somebody that enjoys a very minimalist style of decoration. The colours that I've chosen are based on the fabric that I'm going to stitch onto. However, of course, although I'm going to give you the colour numbers that I use, you can choose any that you prefer or any that you've got in your thread stash. So let's make a start. I've got a new workspace open, and the first thing I need to add is a rectangle. So a couple of clicks and then press the select tool, and I've got my rectangle. I'll change the stitch properties and thread colour in a moment, but first I want to change the size. So I'm making sure the aspect ratio lock is turned off, and then I'm going to make the width 100 millimeters and the height 35. Then from the fill I'm going to select a tatami stitch. No change to the effects, but in the stitching I'm going to set the angle to 0, and that's going to work across the rectangle. I'll change the colour while I'm here, and I would like to use white. Just one thing about Hatch Digitizing software is if you don't know the number colour, as long as you've got the appropriate thread palette loaded, if you type in the name of the colour, then it will still come up. So if I type blue, you can see I've got various different blues to choose from within the thread palette that I'm using. Just a quick tip there. Right, so the next thing that I want to do is to create a border around this. Rather than going into create layouts and using the outlines tool, I'm simply going to duplicate and then change to outline. Change it to a stipple run. Actually, I'm going to change that to a satin, sorry, I beg your pardon, with a width of 2 millimeters and colour of black. There you go, nice, quick, simple. Next up, I'm going to duplicate that again, but I'm going to change the size and the type. So I'll change it to fill, and the size I'm going to change to 35 millimeters wide by 15 millimeters tall. Again, I'm going to change the stitch angle to 0, and this time I will be changing the colour to deep rose. That I'm going to duplicate, change to outline, satin stitch, 2 millimeter width, and the colour of black. There we go. So I've got my two panels here. I'll just group those temporarily while I work with them. Okay. Now to add some text. So I go into the lettering toolbox and type out my word. I'd like to use a different font. I'm going to choose City Medium, and that's from the pre-installed embroidery fonts that come packaged with Hatch Embroidery Digitizing software. I want to change the size to 18.5 millimeters and also change the colour. Now, while I've got those there, I'm going to select the top three elements, so that's the panel, the frame and the text. Right click, align and space, and align centers. I'll group those temporarily as well. Next, I'm going to add the year text. Obviously I'm making this in 2021. You can change it to whatever year or number you would prefer. The text style I'm going to use is run block. And I'm going to change the size to 7 millimeters and the text is quite close together, so I'm actually going to increase the letter spacing just to make it a little more legible. Color's going to be black, and then again here I'm going to align them. Now I can move those as a group, and I'll position that so that the vertical center of that panel comes in line with the vertical, with the A, and then the horizontal center comes in line with the bottom of the satin stitching from the previous panel. So there you go, you can see that now as a good layout. So I'm going to ungroup by using Control U all the way through till they're all single layers again. Now I've got an issue. Basically, if I stitch this pink directly on top of this satin stitching and tatami stitch, there's going to be much too much density of stitching. So I'm going to get rid of some overlaps. In my Edit Objects toolbox, there's an option down here called Remove Overlaps. I'm going to start by doing it with the journal text. So select the text and then press Remove Overlaps. So you can see it split that top layer into 3. That's because there are some landlocked areas in the text. Now if I select the pink panel and choose Remove Overlaps, that's going to punch through both the white background and also the satin stitch. So if I hide the panel and hide the text, you can see now it's punched through this stitching, so it's leaving enough space for the extra stitching on top to fit through. If I get rid of this one as well, you can see there it's punched through that back panel. So I'll make those all visible again, and realistically that's all that I need to do to create this design. There is nothing more. I'm just going to close those two tabs on the right, zoom in a little, and then turn off the true view just so I can double check a few of these jumps and make sure everything's okay. Realistically, I'm not doing too much jumping, but I can see that there will be some threads that I will need to snip later on. I'm also going to run it through the stitch player in the Hatch Embroidery Digitizing software just to make sure that I've double checked everything and the sequence and the way things are going to stitch out. Okay, that looks fine to me. I was a little dubious about the centers of the white panels, but I think I'll get away with it. So I'm going to export that in the PES format, as I have a Brother Embroidery machine. However, obviously Hatch Embroidery software does export in multiple different formats, so whichever machine you've got, you can do that. And I'm going to head off and stitch this out on my machine, and I'll join you back here in just a moment with the result. Okay, so here's the finished result. Apologies for the lighting, but there are a couple of things that I've noticed. One is that the pull compensation on the white panel isn't enough, so I'm getting little patches of fabric between the border and the stitching. And the other was that I don't think the satin stitch around the borders was just wide enough, so I'm going to go quickly and make a couple of those changes. So some of the changes are going to be relatively quick and simple, with just a couple of changes in the Object Properties tab. A couple of the other things I'm going to have to re-digitize entirely. But as you saw from the earlier part, it's quick and easy to do. So first things first, let's tackle the pull compensation for the background. Now I'm going to group these, and then I'm going to open the Object Properties panel, and we can see the pull compensation is currently 0.2, and if I turn off True View and zoom in here, you can see that the pull compensation brings the pink stitching to just about the middle of that zigzagging, and the push compensation to around about the same. Look what happens when I increase the pull compensation. It pushes the stitches out even further. In fact, I might even just go up to 0.5. So basically, when you're stitching horizontally like this, it's going to be pulling in the stitches from the edge. So we want to compensate for that, and that's what pull compensation is. So let's turn True View back on. We'll go back out to the design size. So that has potentially fixed that. Obviously I'll need to restitch to double check it. I might just increase the pull compensation here a little bit as well, just to be doubly sure. Now, something else that I wasn't too happy with was the width of the satin stitching around these shapes. So this one, it's easy for me to change because I can go back in here and increase the size. However, when I remove the overlaps from this object, it's made it a fill with a satin stitch, so I can't change the stitches there. So I am going to have to re-digitize that block. So I'll go back into Digitize, get the rectangle, select, fill, change the size to 100 by 35, which is what it was before. Outline, bring it over the shape. Don't forget you can obviously use the alignment tools. And you can see how that pull compensation has brought the stitching out to the sides. That's actually really good because we can see it in effect. But I want this to be a satin stitch here, don't I? So that's there, and that's 2.5 as default. I will just make sure they're aligned. Whoops. I picked up the date by mistake. Now you can see by redigitizing that rectangle, it's put it in the front of everything. So I just need to move that up the stack so that it sits behind. Now I am going to have to remove the overlaps again here to punch through that shape. And what I would also like to do is just make a very small change to the points here. So, oops, let's zoom in a little bit more. And I would like to change, oops, this one. Shift and click to select both. Just move it out a tiny fraction. I'm happy it hasn't changed anything else. Undo, redo, no, that's fine. So if I unhide those, hopefully that should have fixed the issues. There was a small bit of overlap here, but I'm hoping the pull compensation will change that. So I will again run that through and restitch. What I might actually do is, while I'm here, just resequence. So I'll stitch all of the colour panels first and then those two colours together, so I've just reduced the amount of colour changes that I'll need to do. Okay, so anyway, you can see how you can build the designs quickly, test stitch, and then or run it through the stitch player in Hatch Embroidery test stitch it on your machine, and then of course you can come back to the software, and because you've got it in the EMB format you can make all sorts of changes or even redigitize sections very quickly and easily. Okay, I will be releasing a video in the future where I show how to create the journal cover itself with the stitched effect finished, so I will show you the finished project at that point. Thanks for watching. That's it for this time. If you've enjoyed this video, please remember to give it a thumbs up, and if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments section below. And for more from me in the future, please remember to subscribe to this channel. Thanks for watching.